and welcome to our newest episode of Toxic Concept Bureau. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. His name is Martin Carafa, and he's an incredible brand strategist. He's worked with almost every touchstone brand from Unilever to Mercedes-Benz, the United Nations, Coca-Cola, BMW, Nike, Sephora, Amazon, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. I could go on and on. He's led teams as the head of strategy at some of the greatest global agencies. And what's really exciting about having Martin here today is that he has an incredible cultural lens. He helps huge brands solve huge cultural challenges. And what he's talking about today is a subject that is fascinating. And it's about the identity of older men in society. Martin does a lot of meaningful study around age and masculinity, belief systems, and values. And I asked him to come talk to us about what he calls the cultural code of the cool old guy. There's so much to learn and understand here, and so much that it reveals not just about older men, but really about everybody. So I think you're going to love it. And with that, Martin, I will hand it off to you.
Oh, Jasmine, what a fantastic and very kind introduction. I am really, really pleased to be here too with the team from the Concept Bureau. And I'll do my best to make sure that everybody comes away with at least a little bit of a better understanding of the differences in values between generations and age groups. So I'll just start to share my screen, if I may. And we have here the culture of the cool old guy. And as I start, I'm going to say that much of what I'm presenting to you now comes out of conversations I had with two other cool old guys. One is James Cloninger, the founder of the Motif Agency in Washington, D.C., and the other is Julian Harcourt, who is the founder of Grey Afro Agency in London. Two very cool old guys who are not ashamed of the word old, but we'll talk about that very, very soon. So let's talk about the coolness of cool old guys. You know, we old guys used to set the rules of cool, and we kind of invented the word. Or at the very least, we think we did, and we at the very least said, well, we're going to change the meaning of the word cool from not quite cold to something which is much more, we'll call it hip. Difficult to find a synonym for the word cool nowadays. But today we don't set the rules of cool. Not a bad thing necessarily, given some of the things that we're going to talk about today. But that doesn't mean that because we don't set the rules of cool, today we must be setting the rules of uncool. And there's an awful lot of ageist stereotypes around the place. I'm going to play you now an ad from the Super Bowl in 2008 from E-Trade called This Is Getting Old. And I'll make a few comments on it afterwards, and you might have some comments to make on it too.
Day-o, day-o.
Wake up early.
Clap on some cologne.
I'm 85 and I want to go home. Working tech support on the next new phone. I'm 85 and I want to go home. So day, me say day, me say day, me say day. I want to go home.
Day, me say day, me say day, me say day. Oh.
I want to go home.
Just got a job as a lifeguard in Savannah.
I'm 85 and I want to go home.
I'm dropping 6 beats, they call me DJ Nana.
I'm 85 and I want to go.
Don't get mad. Get E-Trade, kiddo.
I may be, when I'm 85, in a scooter, in a mobility scooter, but I assure you I'm still going to be cool in my mobility scooter, and I'm still going to give, as the lyrics of that jingle said, tech support on the latest phone from that scooter. No questions asked. And that's one of the stereotypes that we really do have to fight against. Because the cost of being thought uncool is paid in ageism, stereotypes, lost economic and social opportunities. But even more so, the cost in simple human connection, decency, and respect if you're thought of as uncool. Not to mention the commercial opportunities, right? Especially in tech. People over 60 are amongst the heaviest users of online shopping, for example, and buy the tech gadgets at very much the same rate as people who are younger or even older, the oldest generations. It's very interesting because, many old guys, I'm one of them, will find ourselves in the workforce for longer than we expected or planned for. Some will do it by choice because there are new opportunities given labor shortages worldwide, and some by necessity. There's a stereotype, of course, of the wealthy multi-house boomer. That is not universal. And if, indeed, older consumers spend more, have we ever thought that it might be because it's just expensive to be old? The things you have to do to make your life comfortable as you grow older actually do cost more. Governments around the world, too, are demanding that we work longer, so some of us have no choice. It's not the same world, but in many ways we're still the same people. There are values that every generation holds dear. So let's think about it. Old, it's almost synonymous with an insult. When E-Trade said this is getting old, it meant this is getting bad. Well, old isn't a 4-letter word, as my fellow cool old guys and I like to say. Old is not an insult, young is not a compliment, wrote Nicole Erdang. Let's get this straight. If at 55 you feel energetic, adventurous, ambitious, you seek new challenges, you embrace new ideas that stimulate the brain, you are not young at heart or some other such bullshit phrase, then that's what it's like to feel old. And I'm quoting Julian Harcourt, one of the fellow cool old guys I mentioned before. And John Waters, who is, I believe, in his late 70s now, who's counting, calls himself a filth elder. He's kind of proud and happy to be old. He's happy that his subversive films are now being made into, say, for example, musicals that every high school student wants to have a part in. So old guys like myself, and I'll reveal exactly how old I am very shortly, cool as ever, but by our own rules. And that's one of the things that I think intergenerational understanding, because the generations have different values, we can really enhance our moving forward as a community. So let's talk about the word cool. So is that cool? Is it not cool? That's a fast decision. It's instant, it's instinctive. You see it and you say, oh, cool. And it's part of daily decisions about what we value and what we don't. Too fast to be rational, all these decisions. Emotions navigate life, because one of the things that emotions do is not just bind us to each other, but it gives us a very, very quick way of deciding what we're going to do, reacting fast. Now, when a group of people share an emotional preference, say, for example, I prefer to be alone, I prefer to be with other people. It's necessary to be both, but some groups of people prefer one to the other. That whenever you have an emotional preference like that, that's a culture, and there are ways to measure that. So the common emotional preferences that shape a culture come from shared formative experiences, because that's where we get our instincts. When we've learned what some of the things that we encounter in life mean, what our values are around them, do we think they're good or bad? That's an instinctive thing. And so many of these formative experiences actually come from early in life, your family. When you emerge into the world as a young adult, when you become a parent, you change your values. And many, therefore, broadly relate to demographics and age group. So some of the common experience might be down to people in a specific country or nation or region have a common formative experiences. They might speak a particular language, which determines to some degree some of the ways that they interact with each other and their experiences there. Ethnicities grow up in very different cultural environments. Shared collective experiences, especially traumatic ones, will change the values and emotional preferences we have. And we've just lived through around the world, we have just lived through a very traumatic experience in the pandemic. But of course, the ones we're talking about here are generation and life stage and gender. Now, one of the ways that we're going to measure the differences in values between groups, measuring these shared emotions, is a tool that we use at The Culture Factor, of whom I'm an associate partner, called Consumer Culture Intelligence, which was developed in collaboration with Mediacom. Very big global sample in each way, around 60,000 consumers in 51 countries and regions, which is infinitely segmentable. We're interested right now in age and gender, but we can do it by way of education, income, or language and ethnicity. We, after 5 years from developing the tool, it's now time, because values tend to change very slowly, to update that. And so 2023, 2024, we'll be updating that and noting the differences between the values environment, which obtained in various cultures around the world, and how that's changed between 2017 and 2024. We've already done the USA, and I'm quoting some of the differences a bit later on. But next cabs off the rank are India, Indonesia, and more, in fact, European and North Asian cultures. So this is how we measure culture. And I'll invite everybody on the call at the moment, or in this presentation, to, if there are questions or comments about this particular slide, by all means, I'll go through this pretty quickly. So definitely make sure that you stop me if there's anything you want me to clarify. One of the ways in which our emotional preferences differ are, there are people who are optimizers. That is, I defer gratification until I can get the very, very best possible result. I believe that everyone and every brand should improve incrementally, and at the end of a series of incremental improvements, something revolutionary has happened. That's one end of the value spectrum. The other end is, hang on, I want something now. Why should I wait? Does it have to be perfect? Of course not. Just give it to me right now. And it reflects whether we're dissatisfied even with ourselves, or are we kind of proud of ourselves and say, no, I don't need to change. So this affects all kinds of things, like Starbucks per head. If you tally up Starbucks per head for countries around the world, which end do you think it's on, optimizer or gratifier? You're going to go up and you're going to give a complicated order. Yes, I'll repeat my order. My order is always, a grande iced cafe latte with an extra shot, non-fat milk, and no ice cubes, right? Because I want it to be the optimum experience. Do I want to put syrup in it? Do I want pumpkin spice? Do I want this or that, or a half cap or a decaf or whatever? That's very much an optimizer culture. So you see Starbucks being extremely successful in places like China and Japan, which are amongst the longest term cultures on the planet. So, for example, Japanese culture invented the idea, Toyota in fact, invented the idea of Kaizen, the constant incremental improvement. You can always do something a little bit better. And it's interesting because that's one of the reasons why Starbucks is not so prevalent in Latin America, which is very much a gratifier culture. But it also affects brand architecture. Do we expect brands to grow and change, or do we expect specialist brands who stick to their knitting? And our old guys, particularly in the United States, are solidly in the give it to me now camp. They're gratifiers. Then there's me versus we, or individualism versus collectivism. Hugely important way in which cultures differ from each other. Are we strong because of something that's in our character? That's an individualist value. Or do we take strength in being part of something bigger? That's collective. So if we think about collective cultures, many in Asia and Africa are collective cultures. Much greater use of color. And I have a slide, amongst many slides, because I'm an ex-planning director, and of course we have slides for everything, where we look at the crew uniforms for airlines from collective cultures and airlines from individualistic cultures. And individualistic cultures are much more uniform. You have to read the text on the badge of the crew member to know what they are, or whether, in fact, or not, they are a crew member. Such are the uniforms of some of them. Influencers. Is it just enough to be famous, or does it have to be relevant? Or, indeed, do you perhaps not need to be an influencer at all? Can you just be a person on the street who gives a testimonial? And it also affects the way that we pitch our stories. Is the narrator speaking for themselves, or is the narrator just present, showing who and what they are, the social context of the brand? and allowing us to put the rest together. Now, old guys, especially in the United States, very, very, just what I say is what I mean, not reading social context as much. And again, anxiety is something that we measure. How much do we worry about problems? Are we constantly scanning the horizon for new threats? It turns out the very anxious cultures are the ones who are most accepting of secondhand and refurbished goods. Interestingly, because the more nervous you get, the tighter you hold the pocketbook closed. So any way you can get an optimum experience for less, that appeals to an anxious culture. Instagram and TikTok are anxious, in fact, and anxious cultures actually click on more ads because there's a fear of missing out. What do I not know that I should know that's behind this ad? And our cool old guys don't do that. Very relaxed. We're not constantly scanning the horizon for something to be afraid of. Then ambition is interesting because this is how much do we sacrifice achievement for quality of life. And this is usually connected with luxury goods. Luxury goods are a very ambitious culture thing. And our guys, they're kind of mixed ambition. Yes, achievement is good, but I want to enjoy life too. And they don't use social media for work, definitely. The next is an extremely important and fascinating way in which cultures differ, and we've only been able to measure it since 2017, is abstract versus literal cultures. Head, the abstract cultures, versus heart. Tell me what you mean straight. LinkedIn is a very abstract culture place where you're always talking about abstract concepts. Magical realism is much preferred as a literary and filmic style in abstract cultures. This is why Latin America has such a strong tradition of magical realism, because they're an abstract culture. In fact, any culture that uses a Latin-based language is much more comfortable with abstract concepts. When we think about this in English, because half of our ideas for abstract ideas come from the Latin. And our guys, we're very literal. Let's look at vanity. And this is just a way of saying, do I get an emotional kick out of shopping, or is it utilitarian shopping? And interestingly, those cultures that get an emotional kick out of shopping have much less concern about data privacy. I want something that makes me feel unique and special. And so, I don't care if somebody else knows about it. Maybe that's a good thing. Well, our guys are very utilitarian, the cool old guys, whereas younger generations in so many parts of the world have a much greater emotional investment in brands and shopping. Then there's practicality, which is the flip side of that. So do we take personal responsibility for the effect of our purchases, or do we just want it to do what it says on the tin? And if you look at the Volkswagen market share after the exhaust scandal, you can see the place where Volkswagen didn't suffer were in the practical cultures. And our guys are practical. And there are some cultures that always are seeking information, more information, what's the benefits, all that kind of stuff. I live in Munich right now, and one of the reasons why that milk carton, which is the illustration of this value, is in German is because we are amongst the highest information culture. And those high information cultures use very, very few voice commands, doesn't actually give us enough information. And high information cultures actually use fewer ad blockers because, again, we want the information. Our guys are very high info. Tell me lots. Tell me very, very practical things. And the last is buzz versus benefit. So buzzy cultures. Do we care that we've heard of it, that it's famous, that people I respect or people who are famous use it, things like that, or we just want to know what it does? And buzzy cultures where buzz is very important, tend to have fewer Facebook ad clicks because they tend to say, I just get the message and I'm not going to search for more information like the high information need cultures. And we're very low buzz, us cool old guys. No, I don't care. Just tell me what it does. So all of those things, our cool old guys tend to look like, a country unto ourselves, a culture unto ourselves. And we know when we look at all of those, there are so many things that can unlock. But the key cultural drivers among generations are three. They're the individualism dimension, which is I'm more interested in what it does than who it's for or how it helps me fit in. And I don't value popularity so much. The optimizers, we are definitely gratifiers. We don't opt for continuous improvement. We don't defer gratification. And are we searching for new problems to solve or just interested in getting happy? And again, we are, what does it do? Give it to me now, and don't harsh my mellow. So we look at that, and how does this play out? These three elements define how global culture is changing. So let's take our optimizers and gratifiers and our individuals versus social context. So here, horizontally, we have our long-term optimizers, defer gratification, want the best outcome, short-term gratifiers, give it to me now, don't make me wait, it's probably good enough. Then we have here me cultures, low social context. What does it do? Doesn't matter where it fits in. What's in it for me? We cultures, collective, always looking for context. How does it help me fit in? Who is it for? I'm going to show you where boomers in various countries net out on this. We can see the boomers, and by the way, I'm a late boomer. So I'm a yuppie boomer, not a hippie boomer. But us boomers tend to be the short-term gratifiers, right? And it varies. We have lots and lots of cultures where we're very individualistic at the top, and some where traditionally we're kind of collective, and that has to do a lot with a lot about development levels and things like that. So let's just compare our boomers. I'm up there. I've done the questionnaire, so I know I'm extreme short-term and I'm extreme me. So that's where I am. In fact, I think I'm Danish, is what everybody has figured out. So if we look at that and we say, how does this contrast with Generation Z? Here's Generation Z. The biggest shift that we can see is that Generation Z has learned how to defer gratification. Now, anybody who has been a teenager in the United States, I'm going to say a sentence to you and ask if it doesn't resonate with you. Oh, say you're a boomer or Xer parent. Oh, I see on Thursday you have an hour between soccer practice and choir. Why don't you take up another extracurricular so that it'll look good on your college application? So when you get taught things like that by those people who say, oh yeah, long-term thinking, that's a good thing, then you learn to defer gratification. And so Gen Z is not as impulsive, and we're going to talk about that a lot. You tend to see change as something you can always do a little bit better, constant change, whereas people of my particular cultural group say, no, change, this constant change makes me feel uncomfortable, slippery slope. Where is it going? If you're going to change is always painful. So blow shit up and disrupt things and make sure that it's permanent when you do, that you're doing it for some better reason. It's interesting, if we contrast Gen Z with millennials, again, we can see there's the same tendency seems to be happening, but generally the millennial generation is a bit more individualistic than Gen Z. So there's Japan, here's the UK, here's where I don't think we even have Netherlands Gen Z on here, but Sweden, for example, is moving, is down there. Germany, particularly, where I live right now. And we have here the difference in millennials, because millennials are barely able to be part of the East-West divide. And there is a difference between the two, but not as big as the difference between millennials and Gen Z. So that's interesting, because when you start thinking about this idea that we constantly have to change, we have an obligation to be improving constantly, and it's your individual responsibility to do so, that you can understand why it would make people anxious. And so Gen Z is amongst the most anxious generations ever, and that should surprise nobody. For example, the difference in anxiety between boomers and Gen Z in the UK. You remember the boomers in the UK were kind of over here a bit. It's 40 points of difference in anxiety between the two generations. So that anxiety is perhaps one of the defining features of Gen Z, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And I can tell you that between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we have become, in the United States as a whole, part of that has to do with the fact that we are, the older generation that has, some of them have left us, and the younger generation, more are coming into the community to start influencing our values. So we've moved 6 points to be more collective, more social context. We've moved 5 points as a country to be more long-term optimizer. And that's for the entire country. That's not for a specific generation. So this is a new cultural landscape that younger generations particularly are being very influential in. And that means our cool old guys were the culture. Now, effectively, they are the counterculture. We're kind of comfortable with that because that was how we made our stake back when we were young baby boomers. But we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. So let's start thinking about some of these influences. Think about the silent generation. When we say the silent generation, the greatest generation, I'm talking about the two generations which came of age before World War II and which influenced and which effectively fought World War II. And before I go on with this, I'm going to have to credit this insight to a conversation with Bradley Sherman, who's a demographer and author of The Super Age, and incredibly interesting. I would commend his work to all of us. But if we think about our silent generation, fought World War II, they witnessed rampant inequality. Lots of people got rich. The Roaring Twenties, the stock market boom, the Gilded Age. In Germany, the Gründerzeit, when rapid industrialization put more money in people's pockets. In Turkey, there was Ataturk. All of those, witnessed that. So rampant inequality, and it made them feel, hang on, is this the right thing to do? They were the new tech adapters. We talk about digital natives nowadays that, they were radio natives, automotive natives, packaged goods natives, home appliance natives. But that optimism was dashed quickly. War, another war after the Great War was supposed to end all wars. Collapse of empires. They had a global pandemic just to keep you on your toes. Hyperinflation and that prolonged depression beginning, which so defined the 1930s. So these two tots, they actually grew up to be the silent generation to raise the baby boomers. So who did they become? Well, they became stability seekers because anxiety dominated their lives, the silent generation. Military security and economic security. They became more communitarian. When they entered the workforce after World War II, that was one of the best, taxes were at 70% in the highest brackets. And it was one of the heydays of organized labor. And businesses needed to be responsible. And they always had an eye on the future, thought long term, valued staying flexible. Progress and tomorrow became magic words. When I was growing up as a kid in the 1960s, it was constantly, things are going to be great in outer space, and by 2022 we'll have jetpacks. 2022, by the way, is when George Jensen was born, for example, if you didn't know that. So that was the kind of future, even in the near future, that they envisaged, because progress was happening and it was always good. That's who they became. So who does that remind you of, the silent generation? Well, I'm going to say that Gen Z, like the silent generation, dominated by anxiety. Gen Z believes in fairness, so that they believe in looking at the social context of things. They're more, I call them communitarian. Right? They hold companies to account for unfair, immoral behavior. And they were the ones who have enacted a bit of guerrilla economic justice and invented quiet quitting. And in China, they call that lying flat. And they also focus on the long-term future. which is one of the reasons why sustainability is so important, because that's the ultimate long-term incremental improvement thing that you see. So when boomers speak to Gen Z, they kind of say, well, these people are from a different planet. And not necessarily. You're not speaking to a younger version of yourself. What you're doing is you're speaking to a younger version of your parents, Mr. Boomer, or Mr. and Mrs. Boomer. So that is really an important thing, because when you start looking at how boomers, and again, don't want to stereotype, but one of the things that boomers did was react against all of this seeking of stability and anxiety and things, and said, well, I don't see anything dangerous, and I see, economic prosperity pretty well distributed. This is Dullsville, Daddy-O. And yes, we did used to use words like Daddy-O. So how do millennial and Gen Z marketers connect with people like me? So there are 3 cultural codes. This is the bit where we say, okay, what's the difference in terms of things you can see? And those 3 dimensions that I mentioned, we are short. When I say we, again, in general, boomers are shorter term and more impulsive. They're much more what's in it for me than who is it for and how does it fit into the context of modern life. And we are, perhaps to our peril, not terribly anxious. So I'll get going through this. So impulsivity. Boomers are open to change and innovation. We're early tech adopters, certainly when it came to things like mobile phones, for example. But just don't call change and innovation self-improvement. It's got to make a dramatic change. We're disinhibited. And in some ways, that's kind of our superpower. That, there are a lot of people who wish they were as uninhibited as an old guy. And we definitely believe in, if it feels good, do it. So sensory rewards are really, really, really important to us. So let's think about this. Let's think about a concept like self-esteem. So thinking of long-term optimizers versus short-term gratifiers. Brazil is one of the short-term gratifier countries. Autoestima is the way you translate self-esteem into Brazilian Portuguese. This is what it looks like when you do a simple Google image search for autoestima in Brazil. All of these things say you're great, you don't have to change for yourself, and compliment all those things. There are some things that both short and long term have in common, which is about how self-esteem is inside, and it has to do with strength. But long-term optimizer cultures, Finland is one of those. Itsetunto is how you translate self-esteem. It's often translated in English as ego. It talks about appearance issues. It's associated with depression. And this self-esteem thing is almost like, this is a problem to be managed, not an opportunity. So as cool old guys who are the ultimate short-term gratifiers, think about this as being the way that we see our own self-esteem. Whereas maybe other groups, and this is where the snowflake trope comes in, because long-term optimizer cultures are very critical of each other. This is where the equally unfair snowflake trope comes in. And it's interesting because this L'Oreal, a marketer to cool women, has figured this out, that the boomers that they used to talk to, when they invented the phrase "because I'm worth it," or copyrighted the phrase, very much gratifier and me. L'Oreal preference gets better and better because I'm worth it. In the 1990s, the people in charge, and there's a documentary on this, which I can link to in the notes, they said, hang on, that's very selfish. That's very individualistic. It's because you're worth it. You can do better. We can help you. It's all very optimized, and it's much more collective, too. And so the change has been made. If we look at the famous campaign of Lessons in Worth, where the celebrities, female celebrities who endorse L'Oreal, talk about what I'm worth it means, or you're worth it means. We look at the 2023 versions of that, and Helen Mirren, who is now 78, does her spiel and says the phrase, I'm worth it 4 times, but only once you're worth it. 19 times she says, I did this, I felt this, I thought that. And only once did she say me or to me. This happened to me. I wanted it, but this is what happens to me. Camila Cabello, Generation Z, her lesson of worth, once she says, I'm worth it. 4 times she says, you're worth it. She says, I 2 times. 10 times she said, this happened to me. Criticism makes me doubt myself, as opposed to Helen Mirren, who said, criticism makes me angry. And this is one of the best, decodings of the difference between older and younger generations. And as I say, it's about being a cool woman. And it's no wonder, I think cool women have come to grips with this issue of being cool, or the perils of not being cool, much, much better. And so there is, of course, the latest beauty trend, which is pro-aging rather than anti-aging, to look like you are an old person. And yeah, that is just fine. One of the really interesting things is that when we started thinking about this, we did some qualitative research. We got people to imagine if you were entering a world that was run completely by cool old guys. And these are 2 highly respected, certainly personal associates of mine, who work for Ronin House, who, among many other things at Ronin House, they are specializing in communicating with Gen Z. We said, what's the world that you imagine? It was interesting because one of the things that was common to everybody we talked to was that these cool old guys are loud. Really, really, really loud. And I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, we certainly are. I'm going to show you now a fantastic ad that picks up on that cultural dimension, of being, individual, short-term gratifier, all that. So this is for Philips razors in Sweden. It talks about men being loud.
Olen mies, mutta nykymies. Hellän heikässä nykymies. Olen nykymies. Hellän heikässä nykymies. Miksi te huudatte? Se tekee hyvää, se on oikein. Itkeekö nykymies? Sillä olemme susia. Nautimme pitkistä hiljaisuuksista. Entäpä karvoitus kasvoillanne? Miehen naama, miehen posteri, naama, posteri, naama, posteri. Hän sivelee partansa ennen kuin puhuu. Herran sively! Miten te ajelette partanne? Siten, että se tekee hyvää, se on oikein!
Do what feels right. If it feels good, do it. How many times has a boomer male, in some circles, certainly in some subcultural circles, heard that before? And so we can see that in Harley, perhaps the ultimate boomer brand. If it feels good, do it. Don't hesitate. Look at the map when you get there. Tattoos. Interesting. I live in Germany now. When I go to Austria, it really impresses me how many more people have tattoos. And while Germany and Austria are very, very similar to each other, one of the major differences is Austrians are more impulsive. And if there were ever a decision that was impulsive and didn't give a sufficient consideration to long-term consequences, I will say it's a tattoo, right? So that's part of impulsivity, Harley. Now, let's look at a motorcycle brand which has said we're going to court Gen Z. This is a British brand called Royal Enfield, which is now owned by an Indian entrepreneur. And I'm going to play you an ad that talks about gentle, not so loud sensations. though the soundtrack may come across on the broadcast as a little bit loud. It talks about getting on a motorcycle because you'll see the little lady beetles and flowers and experience the gentle raindrops. And while there's speed and engine noise in it, because it's a motorcycle commercial, not as much as you would think. Be reborn, change in yourself versus be who you are. Always have a new version of myself. That's very Gen Z, very optimizer. I'm going to play this. Okay, I'm a boomer, and I'm saying, where's the action? Where's the excitement? Where's the thrill? Where's the noise? Look, part of that commercial was even in slow motion motorcycle ad. Now that's my instinctive reaction to it. On the other hand, what we can look at is the Mercedes-AMG Super Bowl ad from 2017. And full disclosure, I was involved in the Mercedes-Benz business with BBDO, and I'll pay tribute to the wonderful people at Merkley who are the source of this ad. But it is absolutely about impulsivity. In the course of it, we hear the words blocked in, meaning I can't just hop on my motorcycle anytime I feel the impulse and drive away because I'm blocked in. Just look at the science of impulsivity in this one.
Locked in. Locked in?
Blocked in?
Locked in. Locked in.
Nice rides.
Still looking good.
Now, I'm going to ask the audience here assembled, do you know who the hero of that ad is and why he's in this ad?
Yes. Probably because I'm the oldest one here. I don't know his name, but he's the guy from Easy Rider, the movie, right?
Yeah. Peter Fonda, Jane's brother.
Yeah.
Who are not, Jane Fonda, now known particularly for her pride as an older woman. Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. It's from Easy Rider. And here we are selling, and I don't think I have to remind you, $100,000 car. Right. So this is the thing. And it's going to those people who maybe, not universally, not everybody has the $100,000 in amongst the baby boomer generation, but it's being sold mainly to baby boomers with the $100,000. So, and that's the case with sports cars. And we can talk about that. Car marketing, that's such a boomer subject. So, but it's interesting because if we move from cars to tech, cultural preferences affect tech usage more than technophobia because it's the cliche, it's the old chestnut that older consumers, they're technophobes. Not at all. And I would point you to the Razorfish report, Digital Boomers. Still the early adopters mindset. only 10% of the older audience says, oh yeah, font size is a barrier to me. And of course, tech can solve that. And only 14% of that generation say they need to ask for help regularly from somebody else. And that's actually not a great deal higher than any other generation. And I'm going to say, how does this affect online behavior? Is that if we start thinking about this optimizer gratifier distinction, we can see that there are going to be some cultures that say, I want to get the information as fast as I can. I know what I want. I don't want to be distracted by other things you think might be better, Mr. Algorithm. And so this is Lexus, the United States, Mercedes-Benz, the USA, and Mercedes-Benz, Mexico, all gratifier cultures amongst boomers. And you can see that they have the stepped navigation. What do you want? Do you want passenger cars? Yes. What kind of passenger car? Do you want a sedan? Et cetera, et cetera. You follow that down. This is Lexus Japan. This is Mercedes-Benz Japan. This is Mercedes-Benz Germany. All optimizer cultures where we want to see all the options and craft as fantastic a result as we possibly can. And you can see what the difference is in the landing page. Now, and this is where most global marketers really do go off the rails, is that they say, oh yeah, well, we should have it should be easy to make our web presence uniform around the world. But if you do that, the opportunity cost is enormous by not having the kind of navigation that different cultures would prefer. And that's also a huge thing when you say, do you have the kind of navigation a generation will prefer? So let's look at individualism, where we say it's okay to be alone, where we say, what does it do as opposed to who is it for? Here's Harley Print. What do we think? What is the first thing that you would notice about these 5 Harley ads? People. No people, not necessary. Just want to see, what does it do? Tell me what it does. Here, we're going back to Royal Enfield. This is how they appeal to Generation Z, where the social context, the kind of people, who it's for, matters a huge amount. So the stories of people and how the brand enters into their lives is the way they talk to Generation Z. Very interestingly. Here we look at Corona, one of the most famous boomers, and particularly Xer beers. This is living. Well, where's all the guys' friends? We would say if we were in a collective culture, right? Loners are cool, going your own way. Maybe you have 2 people in an ad like that, but there's never a party in a Corona ad. On the other hand, Bacardi, which is much more about mixed drinks, Generation Z, and particularly Hispanic Generation X, Z, and Y, it's all about partying. It's all about getting together. And so their response, if it's a floor, it's a dance floor, was their response to the pandemic, which severely curtailed, collective getting together. So anxious? Remember, we're not scanning the horizon for threats. We're not worried about things. Don't harsh my mellow. This is one of my favorite demonstrations. What you can see is that when you're in a culture that's not anxious, when you dance, you don't have to dance together. You don't have to dance in unison. And that was one of the features which separated the silent generation dances from the kind of 60s let it all hang out. So I'm going to play you something from 1974 from 73 from Soul Train. Much looser bodies. Nobody is coordinated. I could play this for a minute and a half, and when those who have the PowerPoint version of this presentation can look at it. We won't have time to get to him, but there's even one guy who's doing his thing dancing while he's smoking. Talk about not being worried about anything. So you can see that nobody's coordinated in this one. Everybody's doing their own thing. Now let's look. This is a compilation I didn't make. It's something which is the official best of TikTok 2021. And just look at the way people coordinate their bodies and movements.
Shawty, tell me if I'm wrong, I can see.
All fascinating, but you can see the difference. They even started to talk about nervous. They said this clip started with, "We might get fired for this." So that difference in anxiety is so incredibly important, and it has such relevance to how you communicate differently to both generations. Here's how Harley talks to Generation Z through the campus agency. Learn the ins and outs of safe motorcycling, they say. And one of the best examples of this is two brands that are actually quite similar. If we remember Old Spice, Smell Like a Man, the man your man could smell like, that campaign is now 15 years old. And there was not a hint of anxiety in it. Confident. Wow, talking to you, yes, you could be like this. On the other hand, if we look at Dr. Squatch, every one of their very, very amusing and quite similar ads, it's all about being a man and smelling like a man and things like that, starts with some threat. Are you doing the right thing to your body? The deodorant contains glycols. Am I putting antifreeze under my arms? Is my skin feeling dry and sad? Toothpaste. Do I need 2 different kinds of toothpaste? One for the morning and one for the evening, because the bacterial environment of my mouth it changes when I'm sleeping and when I'm not. Things like body wash is classified by the FDA as a detergent. And, there are all these bacteria eating the nutrition that I'm sweating out under my armpits and turning into something vile and fetid and smelly, and it's all countless new problems. Well, Generation Z warms to that. Anxiety. I'm always looking for a new threat. Me, as a boomer, I'm kind of like, I want to be the man your man could smell like. So these are, in summary, the 9 cultural codes for cool old guys. 1, you have to respect the fact he's going to be more impulsive if you want to talk to him. 2, and conversely, I might add, if cool old guys want to understand subsequent generations, they don't. They shouldn't decry the fact that somebody isn't impulsive. He has high self-esteem, so, there's no treating him like a snowflake. Love loud, strong sensations. Use drop-down menus versus an arrayed choice, because I know what I want already. I'm not going to change. Loners are winners to somebody of my generation, on the whole. You don't need to be always on the social media to counteract your loneliness. There's no need for elaborate stories to establish context. You can just say, what does it do? Have much, much freer body language. You shouldn't look nervous in the way you move if you want to be thought cool by an old guy. Don't give me new problems, right? I've got enough old problems. I just want to, as I say, don't harsh my mellow. And so positive content is very, very positive there. And with that, I want to say that's the end. Thank you. Now get off my lawn.
Martin, this was such an incredible talk. I'm sincerely saying this was from beginning to end fascinating for us. We've been slacking the whole time talking about this, and wow, these insights are really going to stick with us. And first of all, we are incredibly grateful. Thank you.
I am
such a fantastic
grateful
hour.
to have an audience that's so appreciative. And you were slacking because you're all insecure. You have to be getting constantly
nervous slacking.
No, great. No, I am here for you. Questions, comments, bouquets, brickbats.
I guess I could jump in. I'm really curious. The amount that we moved on your 2x2 axes, right, between boomers and millennials and Gen Z. Obviously, we don't have the data, but I'm really curious your point of view. is cultural change like this, is it cyclical or is it linear? You know, your point about how the silent generation reflects Gen Z, it makes me really wonder, is this kind of a loop, right? I think it's kind of like the fourth turning idea. Or are we moving in a certain trajectory overall? I'm really curious your opinion there.
Okay, I'll answer the question in two ways. First, as a boomer, is it cyclical? Is it going to return? You guys worry too much, right? It is what it is. Now, as a planner, I'm going to say it's not necessarily cyclical, but it's not unipolar, right? There are two things. You can move up and down on that if you're a culture. You do it very slowly. So if what tends to be the case is that if there's about 10 or 15 points of difference in the measures that we use, then it's a visible difference that you notice.
Yeah.
Right. But do we immediately go from one pole to the other? Only because in the half century that we have been measuring this, that's what we've done because we've established two poles, right? Yeah. It may be that there is an endless optimizer tendency amongst Gen Z. It may be, but we'll need to get back to you in a century with that. The culture will respond in the way that the circumstances that give you formative experiences respond. So if there's a dramatic change in that, like, for example, the dramatic decline in social mobility, that's going to have a dramatic effect on our values.
John Louis, first of all, you missed a golden opportunity to use your favorite phrase that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. I thought for sure you were going to say that there. I'm just curious, Martin. I come from sociology where, like, for 75 years in that discipline, the big debate was, like, what are the deeper structures that are driving the, values changes that you were highlighting and, like, the, social structure? Is it, on the one hand, you had Marx that was saying it's all the economy, actually. And your discussion of the silent generation rhyming with Gen Z really indicated economic factors are on the ground, like, shaping values. So, like, he's kind of right there. I think, like, he's definitely right about that. Like, the economy does produce values, no doubt. On the other hand, you had Weber, the Protestant ethic guy, that was like, no, it's ideas. That's what drives cultural change. All of our values, everything comes from, like, ideas. Like, you're an idiot to say it's only the economy. So those are just two, but it was sort of like an unsettled question, just from your perspective, like, looking back, over your life and, your work. What do you see any of these deeper structures that, like, produce some of the changes that you talked about?
Well, the deeper the structure, again, I am not a big fan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but the deeper structures are going to be, those deeper structures are going to be far more profound the lower you go on the hierarchy. It's very expensive to live in your head. That's, as you move up the hierarchy of needs and all your physical needs are taken care of, you're naturally going to be either in your head or out of your head, if you pardon the expression, much more frequently. So we do know that dimension of individualism follows, levels of development, right? That it's also very expensive to be an individualist. Being collective means, if you don't have much, you got to stick together. So definitely the most important dimension, arguably the most important dimension, which is individualism, has an economic correlation with it, very strong one. You could almost look at GDP per head and say that's a substitute measure for individualism, me context. So that's that one is very important. The other side is, okay, this optimizer gratifier stuff, is that economic? No. There are plenty of ways to be rich. Japan has become rich very differently from the way the United States became rich. So that's not so much economic. That's much more, what do I think is a good person and a bad person? The one that constantly improves or the one that enjoys life? So to some degree, and this is one of the things that I think most marketers that I work with, who of course use tools that come from places like the United States and the UK and Germany and all that sort of place, very individualistic me cultures. they tend to have a bit of a problem when think in saying that we're not all homo economicus, right? That we make emotional decisions about what we're going to value, that is, spend our money on, because money is a way of allocating value. But Marx, as you mentioned, was a German. It's all about money, right? Who has the money? Who has the power? And that that the fact that we have never achieved perfect Marxism, nor maybe do we want to, kind of shows that it's not all about economics. Maybe that would be my reaction to that.
Yeah, love it. And if I take nothing else from this call, I'm taking away that it's very expensive to live in your head. That really cracked me up.
Yes,
as someone who lives in his head, it's like, I felt it hit.
I'll give you a few pointers. I have a very cheap head, so that's all right. Yeah.
I kind of want to dig into what you're saying here. There's a question I wanted to ask, and I think that there's something much deeper under the surface of it. The question on the surface is, this dichotomy between, boomers seeing Gen Z as kind of a reflection of their parents. And I wonder if the stereotype of boomers hating Gen Z is kind of because they remind them of their parents. But the question is actually, I think, much deeper than that, in that, is there an inherent sort of conflict when you're on different ends of these spectrums? Like, I think of Gen Z saying, oh, the boomer consumption is why the planet is dying, right? And so I wonder do these spectrums almost like necessitate a cultural conflict, if you will?
That is a good question. And I am reluctant to say yes to it. Firstly, because I'm not sure I believe that. But secondly, because that's a very, they even call English-speaking cultures conflict cultures. And it's part of the ambition dimension, or as Professor Hofstede and the way the Culture Factor now calls it, motivation for achievement and success, which is all about, dominance, assertiveness, all that kind of stuff. Cultures that are very dominant and assertive, America traditionally has been like that. There's more necessity for conflict. We see if one person has something, it must be at the expense of somebody else. That's a zero-sum game. I see a difference in that as cultures become more concerned with quality of life, less ambitious. And remember, younger cultures are less ambitious. They're the ones who invented quiet quitting, as I said before. And it's much more collaborative. I'm going to recommend a book to you, which was written by a former colleague of mine called Annette Simmons, called Drinking from a Different Well. And it talks about how the genders, conflict versus collaboration, and how, the survival of the planet will depend on our collaboration, right? And that there is a slow but consistent movement towards collaboration. So I don't think, going back to the original question, I don't think conflict is necessary when you have disagreements. But there are ways and means, and that's part of what the Culture Factor does as a consultancy, is to advise on how to harmonize those different cultural outputs. And that's been some of the most satisfying consultancies I've ever done, is to say, well, there are people who think differently. How are they going to work together? And that's kind of my bag. But there is, maybe, if you don't manage this, if you're unaware of it, there can be a tendency for resentment. There can be a tendency for opposition. There can be a tendency for all kinds of not just conflict, but confrontation. And sometimes it's unavoidable.
Yeah. This is really interesting. Yeah, I just have one last question here. It's so fascinating. Like, in all your experience, you've been neck deep in culture for a long, long, long time. I'd love to get a sense of, when you think of cultural diversity, is it going up, down, or kind of staying the same? I'd love to get your kind of finger in the air of, like, are we as a species becoming more culturally diverse or less?
What do you mean by culturally diverse?
Well, I mean, I noticed that on your chart looking at boomers, it was quite distributed on the vertical axis, and millennials were much tighter. And so I'm just kind of wondering, we're consuming a lot of the same media. A lot of our kind of shared experience is much more similar now because on a lot of platforms, you've got 1% of the people on the platform are creators, and 99% are consumers, and so I think we as a species are consuming a much more consolidated amount of media. People I know coming from the UK, we watched a lot of American TV, and so there's that kind of homogenizing cultural factor there. And I'm just kind of wondering how you see it, across many different spectrums. Like, is it in some areas there's less, but in other areas there's more? Like, how do you see cultural diversity kind of changing over time?
Yeah, well, there is some research done on this, and I'm not going to answer your question directly because I think there might be some other things that we can put into the mix in considering this question, and that is firstly the assumption that when we are all consuming the same media, right, and we're all looking at it in the same way. Now, just thinking about that, is that really true in the digital age? In the age of television, when I grew up, right? You did. MTV was global. But right now, we have this. And we have cultural bubbles as a result of it. I don't need to watch the same thing that everybody else does. I'm in my cultural, I carry my local culture, my subculture around with me in my phone. Mm-hmm. So, and one of the things, Professor Mareike de Mooij, who's one of the great experts on the application of Hofstede's 6 dimensions to marketing, has done studies on this. And she says, no, in fact, since the advent of digital, we have diverged. We are in our language groups. To me, it doesn't feel like an accident that the rise of digital in the first 2 decades of the 21st century also coincided with increasing separatist movements from Catalonia to Scotland to all of those people. Because I'm carrying my cultural bubble around in my pocket. So I don't want to mention the dreaded word about polarization of values, right? There are so many pieces of research which ostensibly say we are as polarized in our values as we ever have been. And part of that is because we can choose the experiential environment we have that might have a chance of either changing it or not. So that's not a direct answer to your question, but does that give you food for thought, Jean-Louis?
No, I think it's a really fascinating point. I mean, it's when you mentioned the phone, I think of that, there's a stat, and it's something like 20% of Gen Z spend at least 6 hours consuming social media a day, and so it's like, where does culture happen? It's happening in a different forum, which I think is really interesting. I guess just one kind of additional question to this is, right now, to your point about like society or groups fragmenting in their cultural perspectives, we look at demographic and geography as like some of the defining characteristics, and that makes a ton of sense. I'm kind of wondering, as we fragment in other ways, is there any other kind of variable we might look to kind of see the distribution of culture? Like, where are the other pockets, like, instead of just age and location?
Well, one of the things is going to be language.
Okay.
Right? That we live in different linguistic environments if we speak a different language at home. One is ethnicity. When we think about the formative influences that create our values, right? You could imagine that a Hispanic American might have different formative experiences from an African American. And in fact, and I don't want to quote the differences necessarily in just quickly off, and glibly, because that can often be misunderstood. But there is such a thing as Hispanic culture, for example, or African American culture, or Asian American culture, and we know this. And the idea that there are some where that ethnicity, there are some cultures where that ethnicity matters less, and a lot of Gen Z is like that. So if you take that, there's education culture. There's urban versus rural culture. And we did some work with a fantastic agency in Omaha called Bailey Lowerman, who were interested in, like, what's the culture of the coasts versus the culture of what I will call Middle America. And they have a different expression for that. And a lot of that has to do with how hierarchical people are. That if you happen to be hierarchical, you will naturally self-select and move to the coast, because that's where literally the corridors of power are. You want to be near the powerful. You believe in the hierarchy, right? And so there are a number of different things. They're not micro subcultures. You have to have enough people to be a meaningful culture. And you know, I couldn't say, you know, I live in Munich, so my culture is the 12 people who are native English speakers who I hang around with more than I hang around with my German friends. That doesn't make a culture, right? Yeah. Because there are because it's just not a profound enough commonality of experience that allows that. By the way, I don't hang around mainly with other native English speakers, but my German is not good enough to, I don't know, you know, go to church or something. But that's as it may be. Sorry.
Martin, thank you again so much for such a fantastic talk and a really thought-provoking Q&A. And I'm honestly, again, so grateful. We really, really enjoyed this.
Oh, and I have to say, it has been an absolute pleasure to do this. You gave me a platform where I can shoot my mouth off, which, if I want to put that in cultural terms, that's lack of inhibition, right? So, and so it was an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate the interest, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that you put into that.